Okay, there. Wanted to make sure that everybody knows that we are recording this session. If you want to come back and re-listen to some of the good nuggets that Dave and Jenny go through when talking about community solar market trends and the modeling around the new National Community Solar Partnership target and its pathway to success, always can go back and we'll make sure to circulate that with everyone. So again, welcome. Really excited to be having this conversation today, sort of as a follow-up to our big summit that happened at the end of January. And so big thanks for those who were able to join that summit and are joining again today. Just to provide a little bit of context on sort of where the National Community Solar Partnership sits within the Department of Energy. So the program itself is under the Solar Energy Technologies Office and really is run by DOE, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, along with a number of other external strategic partners like Sustainable Capital Advisors, NASIO, CISA, CCSA. We continue to really build that alliance and make sure that we're lifting up other organizations that are doing work in this space. And so really we are, has spent the last year taking a look at NCSP and providing strategic stakeholder engagement, and really spent a lot of time listening to what the challenges and barriers and opportunities are in the community solar industry, and why community solar is such an important element to success for the solar industry at large, because we have this huge decarbonization goal. And so obviously we want to decarbonize the electricity sector by 2035 and decarbonize the power sector by 2050. So that's what the CEDO office has been working on. And NCSP specifically is looking to really democratize access and the benefits of clean energy to all Americans. And so some of the other things that the CEDO office does is really focuses on technology, really driving down costs and accessibility of that technology, also supporting access to the grid and rights to the grid, and ensuring that that grid is reliable and that there is local community resilience, and that we're continuing to work in that direction, all with the lens of job growth. So I know there's been a lot of focus on implementation job growth, so like the installers, but also, sort of really starting to think about what does it look like to have a solar manufacturing workforce in this country as well, and really lifting up that full circular economy. So let's go to the next slide. And I think this might be Anna, right? so that's perfect. So I'm here to just really welcome everyone to this conversation. And I would say that Anna is your true host here, and she will be sort of wrapping up the session after David and Jenny's presentations and Q&A. So we want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk about Q&A as well. So with that, Anna, it's all yours.
Great, thank you, Nicole, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us. As Nicole mentioned, the National Community Solar Partnership has been working for many years now. It was started in 2015 and funded in FY19 to really address this really important challenge of how do we accelerate the deployment of clean energy, but in a way that makes sure that everyone has access to the benefits of clean energy. So just a broad overview of what the National Community Solar Partnership does. We have three main components to the partnership. One is data tracking. We'll be hearing a lot about that today as we look through the community solar deployment numbers and market tracking efforts. Another big one is collaboration, and we'll be hitting on this a couple of times later on in the presentation. We have a peer network and online community platform where we have over 1,000 members that are community solar stakeholders that do a lot of peer-to-peer exchange, resource sharing, highlighting events, and a lot of really great work happens on this platform. And then another major arm of the National Community Solar Partnership is our technical assistance program, and I'll be speaking a little bit more to that as well. So before I do, I want to sort of ground today's conversation in sort of the importance of community solar. So what we know is that only about half of US households can access rooftop solar. There are many reasons for this. Could be inadequate roof size, it could be shading, it could be that there's a household that is a renter or doesn't have access to roof space. And then there's just not the financial resources to make the upfront investment in a rooftop solar system. So as we can see in the general solar market right now, about 10% of US electric generation is solar, but a very small portion of that is community solar. And an even smaller portion of that is community solar that is really serving low and moderate income households specifically. So we see this at the National Community Solar Partnership as an opportunity to lean in and bring the resources of the federal government to this problem and work with this really robust community of stakeholders to address the challenges to deploying equitable and accessible community solar quickly. And by that, we have set a very ambitious goal and target for the next couple of years to enable community solar to power the equivalent of 5 million households by 2025 and generate $1 billion in savings. And what that means is over a 700% capacity increase from where we are now with community solar and where we'd like to be in 2025, and a dramatic reduction in the bill savings or the expenses of energy bills. So we've set this target, we set it last fall, and we're going to be talking a lot today about how do we get there? What does this target mean for the community solar industry? And what is the National Community Solar Partnership doing to move the industry towards this? Before we get into some of those data and numbers, I want to talk a little bit about something that's very important to us, which is the pathway to success. So in line with setting the new target, the National Community Solar Partnership also developed a pathway to success, which is a series of 5 initiatives that were designed based on stakeholder feedback on what the most pressing and persistent barriers to community solar were, to be able to sort of unlock more community solar deployment and markets. So I'll go over each of these in a little bit of detail, and then we'll hear later from Dave Feldman about just what each of these mean and represent in terms of capacity growth for community solar. So first is access to technical expertise and capacity building. The National Community Solar Partnership has a technical assistance program that has been foundational to the program since the beginning, but we are really leaning in on this element of our programming and ensuring that we have the resources and capabilities to serve a much broader group of technical assistance applicants by doubling our investment and then also making this program rolling instead of delivering it in rounds, making it accessible at any time to any one of our National Community Solar Partnership members. The second element on the pathway to success is to address state and regulatory and policy environment support. And to do this, we have recently launched a state collaborative, so a network of state leaders who are thinking about community solar, and will be sharing best practices, engaging in peer learning, and receiving direct technical assistance and group technical assistance to really think about how do we drive community solar market expansion at the state level. The third initiative is around access to credit and other financing, and this is our Credit Ready Solar initiative. If you are a part of the National Community Solar Partnership, you probably heard a lot about this in the last couple of months. This is a program that's designed to standardize the approach to lending for community solar and really coordinate the delivery of resources, those financial resources, to make access to financing more accessible. And this all culminates into a marketplace that brings together lenders, philanthropy, and developers to really make those deals more transparent and more accessible, and make sure that we can bring on all types of community solar, including those that are developed by community-based organizations or small developers. The next initiative is our low-income customer acquisition and management support. And we are in the process of thinking through an acquisition tool that can help better manage customer acquisition, especially in the low and moderate income space, and leverage some of the programming that already exists at the federal and state level to make the acquisition and management of these subscriptions easier and really reduce the barriers to entry for low and moderate income households to community solar. And then finally is messaging and recognition. This is our Hearts and Minds campaign. And for this, we are really targeting a couple of different audiences to help have standardized messaging about community solar and really standardize the approach to providing benefits for community solar. So at one level, there'll be a recognition campaign that really targets sort of the state programs, the utility programs, the project developers to really incentivize projects that are providing meaningful benefits. And then also running a consumer awareness campaign to really broaden the awareness about community solar and make sure that households know that it is a product that is for them and will provide benefits to them. So I will stop there with our overview. As I mentioned, Dave Feldman is going to talk more about these initiatives and sort of how they work towards unlocking this goal, this new target that we've set. But before we do, I will turn it over to Jenny Heater to give an update on the state of community solar right now. So Jenny.
Great, thank you, Anna. I'm having some connection issues, so I'm going to just stay on audio only and hope that that works okay. So you can move on to the next slide. So today I'm going to be talking about the current status of market deployment and community solar. This is data that NREL gathers on an ongoing basis from states, developers, and other parties that have information about projects that have been deployed or in the queue. So we'll talk about market status, then we'll talk about some policy drivers, and then we'll conclude with the pending community solar deployment that we've been tracking. Next slide. All right, so go ahead to the next one. This is our market status. But before moving on to market status, we want to talk about what is community solar in terms of what we are tracking for this project. The DOE defines community solar as any solar project or purchasing program within a geographic area in which the benefits of that project flow to multiple customers, who could be individuals, businesses, nonprofits, or other groups. And for purposes of our data collection at NREL, we have also added a criteria which says that those customers must be getting some type of credit for their purchase. So it's not just people paying added to their bill, it's that they're also getting a benefit back, financial benefit back. Next slide, please. All right, so this is our community solar capacity by state, and the bubbles here represent individual projects and are scaled according to the size of the project. You can see a few key trends here. One is that our number of projects are pretty concentrated in a few states. We'll talk about that more as we go along as well. But overall, at the end of last year, we had about 5.2 gigawatts of capacity installed over about 2,000 projects. And these projects are located in 40 states and Washington, DC. Next slide. We know also that the growth rate for community solar has been pretty aggressive. So since 2010, annual growth has been about 130% year over year. We know that about 1.8 gigawatts came online last year alone. We expect that number may even be a little bit higher since we might not have captured every single project that came online towards November and December yet. Next slide. We also know that the projects that are coming online have tended to be larger than they were when the community solar market started. So back in 2010, our average project size was less than a megawatt, while in more recent years, it's trended more towards 1.5 megawatts or even 2 megawatts. Next slide. All right, the next couple of slides are going to talk about market concentration. So we know that one of the DOE's goals is to provide access across the country. Right now, we see a lot of concentration in just a few states. So Florida has taken the lead in terms of installed capacity this year with about 1.6 gigawatts. But following that, we have about 92% of cumulative capacity in just 10 states. And about 3/4 of capacity is in just 4 states. So Florida, Minnesota, New York, and Massachusetts really make up a large chunk of the market. Next slide, please. These trends have evolved over time in terms of which states have been leaders. So initially we saw Colorado as an early state leader, kind of from the 2011 to 2015 timeframe when they passed one of the first policies to enable community solar. After that, in the 2016 to 2019 timeframe, we saw Massachusetts and Minnesota coming online. And then more recently, we've seen a lot of growth in Florida and New York as well. Next slide. All right, next we're going to talk about some of the policy and market drivers across the country that are enabling this deployment. Next. So we track at NREL the enabling policies at the state level for community solar. As you can see on the map, we have 22 states plus Washington, D.C. that have some type of enabling legislation. That legislation can vary quite a bit, but generally it allows for virtual net metering, which allows basically the credit to get put on a customer's bill. It also may require some type of mandate or pilot program be adopted by utilities in that state. Next slide. A lot of these programs, though, are limited in the capacity that's developed. So we have started looking at program caps in the community solar space, and we have found that at least 18 states and Washington, D.C. have some type of cap. This could be a cap that's implemented through legislation or PUC regulation, or in the case of Florida or states with voluntarily led utility programs, they're capped by the amount of capacity that has been proposed and approved by the PUC. Some of these caps are megawatt caps, like 300 megawatts. Other caps might be financially based. So looking at saying, you know, the state has this amount of dollars that will go to projects. Next slide. These caps really do vary in terms of their quantity. So looking at just the capacity caps, Massachusetts and New York have the highest at around 3,000 megawatts. These are multi-year programs with capacity that will come online each year. In the Florida Power and Light program, their initial program offering was about 1.5 gigawatts. But then after that, it really trails off to states that have much smaller programs in terms of their capacity. Next slide, please. All right, the other big piece we have started to track is status of low and moderate income programs in community solar. So on the right-hand side, you can see that there are quite a few states, actually 20 states and DC, that have some type of provision requiring or incentivizing LMI community solar. And then on the left-hand side, you can see the capacity that's been installed to date in blue and the pending capacity in orange. So we have a lot of state activity, not a lot of capacity that's been developed so far. We're at about 65 megawatts, and we have about 200 megawatts that's in the queue. So a lot more that will come online, but still pretty limited overall when you consider the overall community solar market. Next slide, please. We also know that these LMI focused programs are also capped. So they are limited to a certain set of megawatts or a certain percent of projects that are developed, or they could be like in Illinois, limited by the total amount of funding that's available. So this can be an issue as well as we think about how the market may grow to support LMI customers. Next slide. All right, I have just one more quick section on pending community solar deployment. You can move on to the next slide. And this is really our summary of capacities that are in the queue. So these are projects that have been approved in one way or another through a utility program or by the state regulator or through an interconnection process. Really the highlight to me on this slide is that we have about 6 gigawatts in the queue in terms of capacity. But if we take that and add it to what we have currently, we're still not going to be at the level we need to be to reach the goals of the Department of Energy. So basically the message is, you know, we have a lot of capacity, we are growing quite rapidly, but more needs to be done to reach our aggressive goals that the DOE has. And with that, I will turn it back over to Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. That is a great transition point for our next piece of the conversation, which will be led by Dave Feldman, also of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, to talk about this disparity, this gap between what we see in the queue and the NCSP target to enable community solar to power the equivalent of 5 million households by 2025. So without further ado, I will turn it over to David.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks everyone for tuning in. So this next part, I'm just sort of going to discuss some of the modeling we did, some of the thought exercises we did to think about sort of the opportunities and challenges in achieving the DOE goal. And obviously, with any model, models are always wrong, but hopefully what they do is they provide some information in them to sort of see what type of things that have to happen, some maybe potentially barriers or maybe opportunities that have to occur for us to get to where we want to go. So with that, I'll try and be brief because I know it would be great if we could get some Q&A in this call as well. So I'm going to be brief, but let's go to the next slide. So just a reminder, as a reminder that the goal is for accelerate community solar deployment growth to 5 million households by 2025 and achieve $1 billion in cumulative savings. So, go to the next slide. Right now, and I should also mention that the great work that that Jenny did and all the work that's happening in NREL, she has this awesome data set. It's slightly different as far as projects and definition from what I'm going to be presenting in the next few slides, which are from Wood Mackenzie and CS. So slightly different numbers, but generally similar trends. So if you look here, we have about 4 megawatts of, 4 gigawatts of community solar at the end of 2021. About 80% of them, 8% of the community solar energy has gone to anchor tenants. So not necessarily subscribers. However, this is changing. This is like New York and DC. Residential subscriptions have averaged around 3 kilowatts in size and saved approximately 10% off utility bills. The goal, what will make the $1 billion savings more achievable, is to have savings of up to 20%. Also, the goal I should note is that we're talking about 5 million equivalent subscribers. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of this work is going to be targeted helping consumers, but we're really looking to get community solar projects in the ground as well. So, with the target in mind, we're assuming a 4 kilowatt average size, equivalent subscriber size. So that's talking in the order of magnitude of 20 gigawatts of PV, community solar PV by 2025. So we go to the next slide. Jenny talked about this, but just if you look at what was deployed, where community solar has been deployed, and where community solar legislation has occurred, very correlated. A lot of activity happens. Not that it can't happen outside of those places, but that legislation really accelerates the growth, and in particular the caps. The places with higher caps, I think it's New York and Massachusetts, and the third state, which actually I didn't see a cap, maybe Jenny can speak to this, but was Minnesota. Those 3 states make up a very large part of the community solar deployment to date. So it's not surprising that those places have high caps and legislation. So we go to the next slide. Also an issue, again, just framing, if you look at where solar is being deployed, at least for residential solar adoption, it's not quite the same thing as community solar, but it's similar trends. Residential solar adoption, the distribution of folks going solar and the distribution of folks in the U.S. LMI customers are not a proportional share of where of the population. So actually achieving more equity in that space is another goal. If we go to the next slide. So There's a lot of, outside of community solar, there's a lot of energy being spent just to increase carbon free sources of electric generation to decarbonize not only the electric grid, but the energy sector in the United States. If we look at some of those scenarios, in order to do that, we need a massive amount of PV, and in particular, on some of the modelings, quite a bit of distributed PV as well. There was about 75 gigawatts of PV installed at the end of 2020. By 2025, if we decarbonizes, so on the road to decarbonizing, we're targeting orders of 250 gigawatts. I'm sorry, I should say distributed. There's 75 gigawatts of total PV. Of that, 36 gigawatts is distributed. So we're talking distributed PV growing from 36 gigawatts in 2020 to 100 gigawatts in 2025 and 250 gigawatts. So that would be a massive level of growth, and obviously community solar could play a big part in that growth. If we go to the next slide. Having said that, if you sort of look at the proportionality, community solar as a proportion of total distributed generation, if that sort of community solar continues to be the same proportion, there'd be approximately 8 gigawatts of PV by 2025. That 8 gigawatts is pretty similar to what Mackenzie estimates community solar to go by 25, 7.5 gigawatts, and both are not near where we need to get to achieve the DOE goal of around 20 gigawatts of community solar. We go to the next slide. So there's a bunch of programs with the community solar partnership. And when we modeled this, we thought, at a high level, what are some of the impacts that these could have? So, for example, access to technical expertise. You could imagine that impacting utilities participating in these more outside of any state mandate. You could imagine quicker ramp up for regulatory friendly states. So states designing things that will help community solar deploy things faster. You would imagine lower system costs, so less costs spent on things that are efficient, and you can imagine increased pricing. So for that, we could, how would we do that? How would we sort of evaluate the impact? We could look at the utility demand, community solar, current community solar forecast, and what would it mean if some projects came online early. And then we could look at things like price elasticity and look at what is the impact of a reduction in price that increased demand. Similar things for the other programs. So state regulatory and policy environments. You can imagine on-off switches. Access to capital. You can imagine, again, quicker ramp up. So projects come online earlier because they have cash. Just to get cash, but you could also imagine lower system costs. Imagine lowering system costs, and you could.
David, we're losing your audio a little bit.
A lot of costs associated with customer acquisition, a lot of time associated with customer acquisition, potential possibilities of reducing both. Surmise, both you can imagine that having a significant impact on utilities getting interested, on states getting putting things together more quickly, lowering system costs by getting more demand from customers. So those are the type of things that we looked at when we sort of said, okay, so this is this is sort of where business as usual we're heading. What do we need to do to sort of get where we need to go? So if we go to the next slide, again, this is, this is what we looked at and sort of mapped, again, these things, these utility and demand potential, capacity coming online early, price elasticity, new state demand for community solar, and expansion of existing state demand for community solar. Those are the type of things that we were modeling on sort of on that impact, and we, again, assigned some of these programs to those. Obviously, other folks might have other opinions on where some of these might fall, and there might be other additional drivers, but those are the ones. These are the ones we looked at. So we go to the next slide. So again, just to, providing some background on the data, we've done some. We have a lot of modeling capacity at NREL, and we've done some exercises on the impact of price increases or reduction on PV demand on the long term. And about for every 10% decrease in price, there's about a 10% increase in demand. That's sort of where we left it. So again, as a reminder, this is a look at Wood Mackenzie projections. You can see they have by 2025, they estimate 7.5 gigawatts of community solar will be sold in the US, and another 65 of additional DG. This is a bit lower than where the decarbonization scenarios are, and community solar represents a larger portion. But for all you can imagine, for community solar to get to 20 gigawatts, you'd either need a higher proportion, or you need to sort of have all there to be the same proportion, just a lot more DG, which presents other complications in deployment. But that's sort of the general idea. If we go to the next slide. So the first thing one could imagine is expansion of existing state demand for community solar. So if we're looking at the 20 states with existing community solar programs, in order to, right now, they're sort of average percent DG of market share for community solar. That's about 9%. It's a bit higher for some of those states with higher caps. So Massachusetts and Minnesota and New York and states like that have percentages more like 25%, and actually Minnesota is more like 80 or 90% higher. But the point is that on average, it's a relatively low percentage. If we could get that percentage to 50% of DG deployment in the next 5 years, that could add another 4.5 gigawatts of growth. Go to the next slide. If we expand demand from the states without existing community solar programs, but which were interested in the NCSP state collaborative to 50%, so not states that necessarily have active markets, but are interested in developing them, and we get those to 50%, that's another 1.5 gigawatts. So we're talking about increasing with those two things from about 7.5 gigawatts expected to 13 gigawatts. And that would entail growing those states from about 4% of DG to 50%. Obviously, big difference. We go to the next slide. So if we expand demand from the remaining states without existing community solar programs, but through utility programs. So Florida is a good example of state with not necessarily typical program, but with utility-led demand for community solar, as Jenny sort of defined it. If we can get 40% of DG within those states to be community solar, that's another 1.5 gigawatts. So that would be about 15 gigawatts through all those initiatives. So if we get lower costs, so if we lower costs by 30%, that would translate into a 30% increase in demand, and that's another 2.5 gigawatts or 2.8 gigawatts of community solar. So that's talking about 17, 18 gigawatts of PV, but community solar PV by 2025. And finally, if we go to the next slide, if we can get community solar projects to come online early, so that was sort of we have projections out to 2026. If we can move all those 2026 projects early through some of the initiatives, that's another 1.9 gigawatts of community solar over the next 5 years. Get us to about 20 gigawatts or 5 million equivalent residential community solar subscriptions. So obviously that would require a bit. That would mean that community solar captures approximately about 40% of the sort of additional DG capacity coming on early in 25 states. And 50%, and another 40% for projects for the other states that for utility programs, and that would be up from 35% in some of the project states with large capacity, and 4% from states with. I'm laughing. My 4-year-old son has locked himself in my my office, and we'll leave. But in addition to all those things, it would require a 30% reduction in solar costs. I'm sorry. I want to call. I will be right back. You can say hello to everyone. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. So all those things would obviously require pretty dramatic changes, and that's why it's so important to have this initiative and all those steps and all the participation from across the U.S. If we go to the next slide, again, these are judgments you can assign them differently, but so based off of that analysis, again, we need to add 12 and a half more gigawatts of capacity, additional capacity on top of what's already expected. These additional drivers we think could push us there through that sort of level of achievement, and sort of you could see from the 5 categories sort of where approximately we could get some of those things. Obviously, state and regulatory policy is very important. That's why it's probably the largest. But there's also there's going to be a lot of a need for all of these things to achieve that. So happy to answer any questions, but that's where.
Great, thank you so much, David. At this point, we have about 10 minutes to open this up to questions. So I'm going to stop momentarily sharing the screen, but happy to come back to any of these slides as they inform some of the answers to these questions. So for the moment, just want to take a look at our Q&A here and see if we have some good questions coming in. So there's a couple of questions that are coming in about specific states where things are moving quickly. So I'm wondering if maybe Jenny, you could respond to some of these questions about sort of what's happening in Florida and New York that's facilitating this growth, and sort of how we understand the community solar markets in those states.
Yep. So in Florida, we've seen Florida Power and Light develop their large program, their first round of it already. And they have also gotten approval to launch a second round of that program that will be about the same size. So they're basically doubling their very large program that already existed. It does have an LMI carve out as well. So a bunch of capacity will come online that's will be serving low income customers. And then in New York, their framework got settled out. And so we're starting to see a lot of the projects that had been selected and approved start to be developed really in the last year. Expect that capacity to continue to increase. And that is those products are run by third-party developers and typically see savings of 10 to 20%. So we expect that market to continue to grow and see customers subscribe just off of the value proposition.
Jenny, I think there's another good question for you about the trends in low and moderate income programs. So sort of how have you seen the trend going for low and moderate income riders is the language specifically used in the question, and how large do we think the LMI portion will be in the share of this work towards the goal?
Yeah, so we have seen LMI carve-outs or incentives, I would say, increase over time. So some of the initial carve-outs we're looking at like 5% of capacity in Colorado when they started. Now we're seeing more common targets around 20 or 30% of project capacity. I think somebody posted about New Mexico, which is opening up pretty soon this year at a 30% carve-out for LMI. So definitely those percentage targets are increasing. I think we're also just seeing more experience with subscribing low and moderate income customers and understanding intersections between other efficiency programs or other programs that can be paired with community solar to help low and moderate income customers. But certainly, yeah, there's still a long way to go. We have a lot of capacity in the queue that should serve LMI customers, but still needs to be fully developed and subscribed before those benefits are happening.
Great, thank you, Jenny. We have a question that I think I'm going to give to David from John about what makes up the total solar DG figures and some other clarifying questions around what DG stands for, sort of what makes up distributed, the DG, the distributed generation portion of what we're looking at.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, some of its definition, DG is distributed generation. So it's typically depends on characteristic, but sort of typically treated as sort of things that show up on customers' bill. So either on site or site, but typically. More located in the community and often either connected to the meter or fed to the grid, and then the utility takes that energy and puts that credits on a customer's bill. So that's made up of a lot of different types of solar, that's from residential solar on someone's home to on big box warehouse store, but also could be community solar projects. And obviously community solar, Jenny's definition is a good one in that it's wide because there are so many different applications of community solar and different ways that customers can benefit from solar. So in some ways, some of these larger projects don't exactly fit what one would traditionally see as distributed generation. But the end market is sort of the same, because it's coming from customers' interest in going solar.
Thanks, David. Another question came in about the state markets. So kind of Stephen's question, and I'll toss it to Jenny first, but maybe David, do you want to weigh in too? Sort of what are the emerging markets at this time? Where do we see potential for growth in the coming years, specifically by legislative mandate or in other ways, thanks to the policies?
Yeah, so we definitely expect to see continued growth in states that don't have caps, and in states where there's a strong value proposition. We know there are a few states kind of in the mix and ready to move forward, New Mexico being one of them, also Hawaii, New Jersey, a couple of states where, you know, there is enabling legislation and they're just rolling out the rules and starting to develop projects. We don't track you know, pending legislation comprehensively, but we are aware of a lot of effort in Pennsylvania, as well as kind of the upper Midwest. So states like Michigan, Wisconsin, even Ohio, I've seen a lot of proposals for new legislation that would open up community solar in those states. So those are kind of on the watch list, I would say, of states that may open up if they do have new legislation. And David, yeah, I don't know if you have more to add on that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, the only thing maybe worth mentioning is here, obviously, the states with a lot of people are going to have more ability or have large capacity for subscriptions. So obviously, places like New York or California or whatever, you know, there's just a lot of people. So that doesn't mean necessarily that there's a lot of money or necessarily the right regulations. But when we're talking about those targets, you know, by necessity, 5 million people, there's just more people in some places.
Yeah, it looks like we have a few notes in the chat too. Missouri has legislation in process, and Virginia I should have included. So trying to get rules finalized there, which will then see deployment eventually.
Terrific. Another question just came in from James, and I think this gets back to sort of the definition of community solar and how it's defined broadly by NCSP and then specifically for the market tracking purposes. Jenny, I'm wondering if you could clarify once again just the distinction between sort of how we define community solar for NCSP and then for the data tracking efforts. You're still on mute.
Yeah, okay, so for NCSP, so for DOE, there is a definition that is based on providing benefits to multiple off-takers from a single project, essentially. There's no mention of, you know, connected to the distribution grid or transmission grid, or whether the project is in front of the meter or behind the meter. For our data collection work, we take one step further to think about how customers are receiving benefit. So we look at subscription structures where the customer is getting a credit on their bill for the share that their solar project produced. So this is the most typical, you know, structure you'd be aware of with community solar, but there certainly are some like edge cases where we have to dig in and really figure out how is this bill credit happening and really make sense of it before we can screen it for community solar versus something else. And certainly, you know, states have decided on their own in some cases how they want to define community solar. So some states do have a project size cap where, you know, projects can't be larger than 2 or 5 megawatts. But other states, there's no cap, or in some states with, you know, utility-led programs, it's really up to the utility and the regulator and stakeholders to come to some agreement about, you know, what project size they think is appropriate or how that project should be interconnected.
Great, and I think we have time for just one more question before we have some wrap-up items for today. So I want to point to one from Ray, which is about sort of the role that energy storage and resilience might play in the future of community solar. I'm wondering if either Jenny or David have thoughts on sort of considering energy storage and community solar paired and how that might impact the ultimate market and the work towards this goal.
Starting just to say that energy storage doesn't produce energy, it stores energy. So it's sort of, it has a cost, and therefore it must, in order to justify the cost, it has to have some value. there is a lot of value we see when we model that storage can have when deploying solar. And so depending on the market, there are certain markets where storage is valued, and therefore for community solar, there's a lot of potential there. I think, particularly, I think utilities would be interested in having storage, solar paired with storage, and there might be, crediting more towards the customers, so providing more bill credit by having that, and so therefore, if the economics work, then that would be obviously more better for everyone. So it's typically storage is typically in states right now that have a lot of solar already, because the more solar there is, the more other factors, the more it becomes beneficial. But so I think start looking at those, but obviously as solar starts increasing in more places, storage is going to likely become more to sort of sustain that value.
Great, thank you. I know this was a very quick hour, and I want to thank everyone. There are some great questions in the chat. We will do our best to synthesize the questions that you're sending in and do our best to respond to them outside of this hour. But before we close for the day, I'm just going to bring back up the slides just momentarily to talk a little bit about next steps. So one of our genuine asks of this community is that you join the National Community Solar Partnership. We are actually, as of this week, over 1,000 partners and over 700 organizations strong. And those partners really represent a breadth of the industry. And a lot of the conversations and questions that are being brought up in the chat and were brought up in the Q&A today are ones that are well suited for this community. There's an online community platform where we have discussions about sort of the needs and the barriers and some of these topics that are related to community solar that need more thought and effort and are able to coordinate on those through that platform. So we really encourage you to join the National Community Solar Partnership. Looking forward, again, stay engaged with us by joining the Community Solar Partnership. When you do join, you'll have the option of supporting the new 2025 target of enabling community solar to power the equivalent of 5 million households. And when you do, you'll be featured on a new map that we have on our website that highlights the partners that are standing with us and committing to this goal. We also really encourage you to get involved by applying for technical assistance if you are developing community solar or supporting community solar. Joining one of the working groups, we have a number of working groups that are informing the initiatives on the pathway to success as they're being developed, and we really encourage you to think about how you might be able to support those working groups. And then of course, we want to be able to elevate your stories and share the successes of community solar. So again, we encourage you to join the partnership. If you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at our community.solar email address. And we look forward to continuing to partner with you as we work towards this new target and bring clean energy to everyone. Thank you again so much for joining, and we hope to connect with you soon.